One of the most awaited characters, Skirk, is finally out, and she is one of the strongest characters you can pull for. Here I'll be discussing every single Skirk team, from her meta teams to the more questionable teams you can use her in, so you can have yourself the best Skirk team for your account. There's nothing more to say, so let's get right into it. Skirk's talents make it clear that she only wants to play with Hydro and Cryo characters, which means freeze. If you don't play her in these teams, her damage is considerably lower. So across the board, you will mostly see people playing Skirk in freeze teams. Now, another issue is this talent here, using which you can create void rifts, which enable Skirk to stay on field and deal a lot more damage. So the reactions mentioned here are Superconduct, Freeze, and a reaction with an animal character. Now the problem with this is when you want to use Skirk in melt teams, you cannot really generate more void rifts. So you cannot really play Skirk on field. Now there are some ways to get around this. You have to do some weird things where you must have maybe an animal character to swirl and get some void rifts, or have a Hydro character. We'll talk about it more in the melt team section, and the same goes with Superconduct, which we all know Superconduct currently is just not good in the meta, so we cannot really have a Superconduct team. But we can have a HyperBloom team, because over there you can enable Superconduct, which does give you void rifts. So that's also another team we will be discussing later on. But right now we will be talking about the main teams that everybody will be using, which are the freeze teams. So the meta team is also a freeze team. A team with Skirk, Non-Escoffier, and a Hydro or Cryo character will get you your best team. If you have Escoffier and Furina, playing Skirk gets very simple. Now you don't need to worry too much about the other characters, because there is no clear winner that this character will bring the most damage to your team, or this is the best buffer for this team. There's just nothing that does that. So all these other characters are pretty close to each other, which is a good thing, because this team is already very restrictive, only Hydro and Cryo characters. So having at least this flex spot is a good thing. Honestly, you can even use Barbara. We have a team which I did test, which you can see the numbers for coming up, and it did quite well. But you know, at that point, if you have Escoffier and Furina, you definitely have other better characters, so it's more like a proof of concept than a team people would really play. But she does quite well, which is pretty nice, and it just shows how strong Skirk, Furina, and Escoffier together really are. Now in the bottom right, you will also see a number, which will basically be comparing the current team with another team. This number isn't too accurate, so don't take it too seriously. It was just me fighting against bosses and then finding an average. So yeah, it's just to give you an idea of how well the team does. Now let's start with a character that you might first think of, which is Shenhe. Now Shenhe does quite well. She is built for Cryo characters, so it would be pretty shameful if she didn't work, and she does quite well. Now this doesn't mean that Shenhe is the best 4-star character here. There are many others, and they're all pretty close to each other, so as you will see, some may be better, some may be worse in different situations. The next one could be someone like Mona. Now Mona has a lot of things going for her. First of all, her Omen buff is amazing. And next, she has access to the Thrilling Tales, which is an amazing book. If you guys have ever seen this book, then please keep it. If you're a new player, save it for yourself. Now Setali, also similar to Mona, has access to Thrilling Tales, and she is just a great character to be used with Skirk. Her shield is amazing, and I personally will be only using Skirk because you can use the Calamity of Eshu with Skirk, which deals the most damage, even more than the Finale of the Deep, and you can only use it when you have a shield. So for me, Skirk will be great, and I always love having a shield. Just makes it a lot easier to play the Abyss and not worry about getting hit. Then the next character you can also play is Neuvillette. Yes, he is a DPS, so this will be a double DPS team, and your Skirk basically acts as a burst support for Neuvillette, and you can just play Neuvillette on field. Now, another character, another DPS, Mualani, also works quite well with Skirk. You might think it's a bit weird, but then you realize that Mualani has access to Thrilling Tales, which easily makes her really good. And she also has access to the Cinder City set, which is just another good bonus for the whole team. Another character you can use is Ayaka. As we all know, Ayaka's burst is one of the strongest skills in the game, and if you pair her up with Skirk, Escoffier is already buffing the whole team, Furina is also buffing the whole team, so your Ayaka will also be really strong, and you can just burst with your Ayaka and then go back to your Escoffier. As we're talking about cryo DPSs, why not Risley? Now if I had to pick one, I wouldn't pick Risley. I would either pick Ganyu or Ayaka, mostly Ayaka, but if you want to play Risley, he can do something there as well. I mean, we're gonna play Barbara and Child, so why not Risley as well, you know? The next characters, Xingqiu and Yelan, also do quite well. As you can see, I know a lot of people have this question: if you have Xingqiu and Yelan, which one is better? Should you use Xingqiu or should you use Yelan? Now here, it's very obvious that Yelan is definitely better because Xingqiu's interruption resistance and the Hydro Red Shred isn't really that important, but the Yelan buff is a lot better, so you're gonna get more damage. Now, another character that you might want to see is Child. Unfortunately, there isn't any synergy between them. The only synergy is the fact that Child is a Hydro character, so you can use him. The Master and Disciple together, everybody wants to see that, so you can try that out as well. Now, Dahlia is a great 4-star to use with Skirk, and if you get more of his constellations, it's even better. So if you don't have any of these 5 stars, which I've mentioned a lot of, then Dahlia is a great option, especially if you have his C6, which is kind of really good. But make sure to use the Calamity of Eshu, which is way stronger than the Finale of the Deep if you do use a shield. So make sure you make use of it by using that weapon. Now, if you want to use other shield characters, there is Layla and Diona as well. We all know we should not be using Diona with Skirk, but if you want to, you can use Layla, even though Dahlia is 100% the better option. If you don't have Dahlia, which is completely fine because he is new and it will take some time to level him up and all of that stuff, you can use Layla. Layla is worse because first of all, you don't have access through Thrilling Tales, so there are some bad things. Now, another character that does really well is Chongyun. He is a 4-star, but there's a lot of buffs he gives and his personal damage is also not that bad. So if you have Chongyun build, I would recommend using Chongyun as well if you don't have anything else to use. Characters like Kokomi are quite good as well because again, Kokomi has access to Thrilling Tales, which is always a good bonus. With this team, it may not be that important, but if, for example, you don't have Escoffier and you need a healer for Furina, in that case, Kokomi becomes really good. There's also Siege Queen. She's also fine. You'll get a similar damage output. And then there is Ayato. Ayato does give you some attack speed bonus. Doesn't make him really insane. He's still gonna give you similar damage numbers as the other teams. Now, Rosaria can be really nice because if you don't know, Rosaria can give you crit rate, which is something everybody would love to make it easier to build your Skirk. And similar to Rosaria, there is Kaya, I guess, but Kaya doesn't give you anything. He's only there to give you some extra damage. Now, Charlotte does have access to Thrilling Tales, which does make her pretty good, but there really isn't anything else. She does definitely have more value when, again, similar to Kokomi, if you use her when you don't have an Escoffier. She is kinda just a weaker Escoffier. She heals, she gives you some buffs, but definitely weaker than an Escoffier. Now, what if you had no Furina? Well, it isn't as bad as losing Escoffier. The only thing you need to do is make sure you replace the thing that Furina was giving you, which was the Hydro application. Yes, you do need a bit more Hydro application than just a few dabs of water because you need to create those voids. So you really only have a few options when you don't have Furina. So there is Xingqiu, there is Yelan, there is Kokomi. Now, even Mona herself isn't amazing for this. You can see that the Hydro application is fine, but it just ends way too soon. So you don't end up creating as many void drifts as you'd like, and your Skirk's duration ends a bit sooner. But the damage output is still pretty nice, so you could maybe transition into a different rotation, so she is usable as well. Siege, similar in a way, can be used as well because she does have off-field Hydro application. It's not the best, but at least she does have some off-field Hydro application. Now, if you don't have any of these Hydro applicators, then you may want to switch off this playstyle and instead maybe play her as a burst support for maybe Neuvillette, which can also work quite well. Now, who will be your last character? You could honestly follow the same principles as before, but now, for example, do not use Citlali if you have Kokomi because you have two Thrilling Tales on the same team, so that is some loss of DPS, so be smart about it. So maybe you can use Citlali with Yelan instead, and by the numbers you can see it does quite well. So if you don't have Furina, it doesn't mean you're out of all options. You have a few more options. Definitely fewer options, but still a lot of options. Now, I tried quite a few teams as you can see, and you can clearly see that there is a damage drop, which makes sense. I mean, if you use Kokomi instead of Furina, well, that's obviously gonna give you less damage. Or if you have bad matchups. Now, a team like Yelan Citlali, now that's a great team because both Yelan and Citlali are one of the best supports, and you get to be almost as the same level as Furina. So there are definitely some really good matchups and some not so great matchups. So just be smart about that. Like I said, if you have any questions, again, you can just let me know and I'll give you an answer whenever I can. Now, what if you had no Escoffier? Well, in that case, you are gonna see a huge damage drop because Escoffier is just a broken character and she really buffs Skirk a lot, and even her personal damage is amazing. So without that really strong character, your team will take a big hit. Does that mean you can never play Skirk if you don't have Escoffier? No, definitely not. You can easily beat the Abyss if you don't have Escoffier. For example, I was able to beat the whole Abyss with completely free-to-play characters. Sincho, Rosaria, and then maybe if you have Dahlia. Dahlia is pretty decent for Skirk, so if you don't have other characters lying around, then just use Dahlia, especially if you have the Calamity of Eshu. Now, I tried a lot of these teams here. Skirk, Yelan, Sincho, Citlali, Shenhe, Yelan, Mona. Then there are also teams with, the free-to-play team I told you. All 4 stars, Sincho, Rosaria, Dahlia, or anybody else like Layla. You will see a damage drop, but you should be able to beat the Abyss. You have quite a few options if you have no 5 stars as well. So you'll have to try them by yourself. I'll not try all of them because there will be just too many to test, but you get the idea. Now let's talk about some teams which do not have just Hydro and Cryo characters. Yes, those teams do exist. You can play them. Are they the best? Maybe not, because this talent here, if you do not have a whole team of Hydro and Cryo characters, you lose out on a lot of damage. And you're just reliant on those really OP supports to make up for the damage. And I tested all of them. So I just tried a team where I have Skirk, Escoffier, and then Furina. And then you can try the premium supports. So you can try Bennett, you can try Shilonen, you can try Kazuha. I tried all of them. They all have their own perks. The ones I like the most are Kazuha and Shilonen. I see a reason to why you want to use them over the freeze teams. Like maybe you want some crowd control, and for that Kazuha is the best at it. So that makes sense. And Shilonen is a great buff, not just for Skirk, but also for Furina and Escoffier. But for Bennett, you're only just buffing Skirk, which, I mean, it's not the best. I don't think it does enough to justify using Bennett over here, and he also isn't a great healer for Furina, so it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you don't have an Escoffier, you know the deal, try another buff. So you can go with Citlali here maybe, or if you have Shenhe, you can try it with that. So that is basically sort of a hyper carry team. Now let's try a Melt team. Now let's first of all talk about Melt, because the reason why it's so hard to make a Skirk Melt team is because there's not just one talent but 2 talents that work against a Skirk Melt team. First of all, you will lose out on that damage because of that bonus, right? But hey, maybe Melt is able to keep up because of that extra multiplier you get. But there's the second talent which says that you can only create void drifts using Anemo reactions, Geo reactions, Hydro reactions, and then Electro reactions. There is no Pyro reaction. So Melt will not get you any void drifts. So right there and then, it just makes it a lot more difficult to just play a normal Melt team. You can't really just do Skirk, another Cryo, and then, I don't know, Shangling and Bennett, right? Because now you're not creating any void drifts, which means your duration will be lower with Skirk, but Shangling's duration is higher, so you're gonna waste out a lot of that Pyronator time. As you can see, there's a lot of anti-synergies that come up because of this. Maybe there's something I'm missing out here, but it's just really hard to make a good Melt team. But I did find Kazuha. If you swirl Pyro with Kazuha with his ult, you get a good amount of Pyro for a short duration, which is enough for Skirk to deal her Melt, and then the Kazuha burst goes away and you can repeat. That rotation makes sense to me. So maybe you could try Skirk, Kazuha, Bennett, and then someone else can be a Hydra character, but when you use a Hydra character, you only have Skirk in your team, the only Cryo character. So what happens is you will try to use her skill first to apply some Cryo, and then you will switch to Kazuha to swirl so you get some Void Rifts, and then you can go back to Skirk. But these teams are just really hard to play in the Abyss. You're just better off playing a free team. Now, if you remember, I said that this talent also allows Geo reactions. So what if you just play a double Geo team with Skirk? I tried this, so I had Skirk, Escoffier, Shilonen, and Zhongli, and it didn't feel that bad. It was easy to play, you had your Void Rifts, it felt the same. There was no freeze, of course, but it felt similar. You didn't have to do anything too complicated. The damage was lower, but it was fine to play. Like if you have a team like this and you just want to play it, I wouldn't be mad at you. The last team I want to talk about is another team that you can make out of using this talent, which is the Electro and Cryo reaction, also known as Superconduct. Now, Superconduct on its own isn't a good reaction currently in the meta, but what does work is Dendro, right? It's called HyperBloom, or I think Hyperfridge now, and it makes sense. This is one team that I would play because it just makes sense. You have an on-field driver, because usually in these teams you really don't have an on-field driver. Like you have Raiden Shogun, you have Nahida, and then you have a Hydra character like Yelan, and Skirk makes sense there. Like of course it doesn't make sense for her, but for that team it makes sense. You have an on-field driver, you can get Superconduct, so you have some Void Rifts, and it works. And I think that's all. I discussed a lot of teams, some not so worthy ones, but the main goal was to show you guys how it works, the damage you might expect, so you can decide if you want to play that team or not. So I hope it helped in that way. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, any teams you want me to test out, let me know in the comment section. I will test them out if I have the characters, and I'll let you know. Anyways, that's all. I hope this helped, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.